The first thing I did when I bought the ranch was rip down the old wooden fence. Not out of spite, just instinct. After 2 decades in special forces, I'd learned that fences don't keep trouble out. They just give it something to lean on. Black Mesa Ranch was supposed to be my sanctuary. 30 acres of wide, open land nestled against a range of rust-colored hills in northern Arizona, 2 hours from the nearest mall and just outside a township that barely had a mayor. Perfect. I spent the first few weeks building a new barn, a chicken coop, raised garden beds, and a custom shooting range set a safe distance from everything else. Nothing fancy, just peace. The kind you don't realize you need until you've lived your life on red alert. Then came the HOA. Or, more specifically, her. She pulled up in a white Escalade just as I was working the post digger into the clay. Out she came, shoulders back, phone in one hand, clipboard in the other, and a sense of entitlement that hit harder than the midday sun. Blonde bob cut, pink polo shirt, and a look that told me she'd never been told no, and certainly never expected to hear it today. "I'm Karen Dempsey," she announced without preamble, stepping onto my gravel drive like she owned it. "President of the Mesa Bluffs Homeowners Association." I leaned on the digger, and her lips tightened. "This land now falls under the HOA's expanded jurisdiction. We voted last week to annex surrounding properties for community cohesion." Annex. I repeated. "This isn't a battlefield. It's a ranch." Karen's eyes narrowed, scanning the property like a general surveying an enemy base. No livestock. No outdoor structures over 10 feet. No unauthorized fencing. No visible firearms. These are standard regulations. "I'm not part of your development," I said, calm but firm. "This is private land, outside HOA limits. I've got the title to prove it." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Boundaries are flexible, Mr. Reed." "Well, Mr. Reed, you'll find that those who resist the HOA often regret it." And with that, she turned, heels crunching the gravel, and drove off without waiting for a response. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I found warnings zip-tied to my mailbox, citations slid under my front door, and one particularly absurd notice accusing me of unauthorized use of agricultural tools in a non-compliant zone. She called my tractor a hazard to aesthetic uniformity. That one made me laugh. Until she escalated. One morning, I found a red sticker slapped across my barn door. "Code violation. Structure pending review." The problem? There was no governing body authorized to issue it, just the HOA's logo and Karen's signature in oversized cursive. That night, the motion lights on the east side of my property kicked on. I watched through my scope, old habit, tracing the silhouette of a person creeping along the outer fence line. She had a flashlight and what looked like a measuring tape.
Karen.
She was mapping my land like she meant to redraw the borders herself. I didn't confront her.
Not then. I watched.
I recorded. Let her dig her own hole. But I wasn't naive. This was more than neighborly overreach. Karen didn't see a rancher. She saw an enemy. And I'd dealt with people like her before, rigid, controlling, convinced that order only existed when they were in charge. She wasn't going to let this go. The next day, a new sign appeared on the road leading up to my drive. "Community Regulation Zone begins. HOA enforced." She drilled it into the ground, right next to my private property marker. That's when I realized this wasn't just about power. It was about control. I thought about filing a complaint, but I already knew the sheriff. He played poker with Karen's husband every Thursday. They'd write it off as a misunderstanding or a neighborly dispute. So I documented everything, photos, videos, timestamps. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for war. And something told me Karen didn't know the kind of man she was picking it with. She didn't know I'd spent most of my adult life behind enemy lines, ghosting warlords and cracking insurgent networks. She didn't know I was a sniper. It happened just after dawn. I was cleaning my rifle on the porch, the desert still cool before the sun could bake it into dust. My border collie, Scout, let out a low growl from inside the screen door. Then the crash came, sharp and sudden, like a shotgun blast through glass. I dropped the rag, slid the bolt into place, and moved. The sound had come from the barn. I covered the distance in under 10 seconds, silent as breath. Years of training kick in whether you call for them or not. As I rounded the corner, I saw her.
Karen.
She was inside my barn. The side window lay in shards beneath her feet, and in her hands, a dented aluminum baseball bat. She was swinging like a madwoman, wild, frenzied arcs that caught on tool hooks, storage bins, and gear lockers. My gear lockers. She splintered the corner of a workbench, knocked down my tactical vest, and shattered a framed photograph. I felt a knot rise in my chest when I recognized it. It was the last picture of my unit before Kabul. "Where's the permit for this damn place?" she yelled, batting at a rack of climbing ropes like they'd personally offended her. "Where's the approval for this military junk?" I stepped into the barn, the creak of the floorboard under my boot finally announcing me. Her back stiffened. She turned. There was no fear in her eyes, just a deranged kind of triumph, like she'd caught a criminal red-handed. "You're trespassing," I said, voice low. "This is an unauthorized structure in violation of our codes," she snapped, breath ragged. "I'm within my rights to conduct a visual inspection. You broke in with a bat. I had reason to believe you were hiding illegal equipment." She pointed the bat at the wall of locked cases. "That's paranoia. No normal person keeps weapons in plain sight." I raised a brow. "This is a ranch. That's ranching gear. Rope, tools, hunting rifle. This is suburbia." "No," I said coldly. "It's not. You're on my land, Karen. And you just committed breaking and entering." She stepped forward, shoulders squared. "People like you think they're above rules. Veterans with your little trauma badges. You think this gives you an excuse to ignore community standards." I didn't answer. I just stepped aside. She tried to march past me, but didn't notice the thin tripwires strung low across the barn door, standard coyote deterrent. She tripped and pitched forward into a hay bale face-first, the bat clattering across the floor. I didn't laugh. Karen scrambled upright, cheeks flushed with fury. She stumbled toward the exit, brushing straw off her sleeves like it was acid. "You'll be hearing from our attorney," she hissed. "You'll wish you'd never moved here." I walked her to her car, slowly, calmly, watching as she reversed so fast she nearly backed into a fence post. Then I went back inside the barn and picked up the photo. The glass was spiderwebbed, but the image was intact. Sergeant O'Leary had his arm around me. We were all smiling, in a rare moment of peace before the mission that took two of them from this world. That was the last straw. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. This was personal. By sundown, I had a folder labeled Operation Repel. Every encounter with Karen had been logged. Every violation, every trespass, every citation, documented, dated, and backed up in triplicate. I scanned the cracked window frame and installed reinforced bars. Then I added another motion sensor and layered 2 more cameras, one infrared, one live feed. She wanted to play watchdog?
Fine.
But she'd find herself barking at a wolf. Later that night, a bright light flickered through the front window. I looked up from my desk to see a drone hovering above my front porch. It buzzed low, pivoting erratically before dipping behind the chicken coop. A new tactic. Karen was upping the pressure. I leaned back, calm but deliberate, and opened the drawer that held my old field tablet, still synced with the signal jammer mounted on the roof. With one tap, the drone's lights cut out. It spiraled once, then crashed into the dry brush behind the coop with a thud. I walked out and retrieved it. No registration number. No brand name. But a tiny sticker on the inside read, "Property of Mesa Bluffs HOA." The war wasn't coming. It had already begun. The sheriff showed up 2 days later. Deputy Hart, clean-shaven and trying too hard to look casual, knocked on my door while pretending not to glance at the motion cameras or the warning signs.
He was polite. Friendly, even.
But I could see it in his eyes. He didn't come for coffee. "Morning, Mr. Reed," he said. "Mind if we talk?" "Sure," I replied, holding the door open just enough to frame him. "You hear about the trespassing report I filed?" He hesitated. Actually, we got a complaint about you. I folded my arms. Let me guess. Karen? He gave a sheepish nod. Says you've been harassing her. Claims you've set traps, damaged HOA property, and, quote, engaged in hostile surveillance of a community official. I didn't laugh. I just handed him a flash drive. What's this? He asked. Footage of her breaking into my barn with a bat, trespassing after hours, and flying an unregistered surveillance drone over private property. Hart looked at it like it might bite. You have all that? Sure do. And it's backed up in 3 places. One of them's with my attorney. He rubbed the back of his neck. Look, I'm not trying to pick sides. But this kind of stuff, it's better handled neighbor to neighbor. Quietly. Not when one of the neighbors is breaking federal airspace laws and vandalizing better-known land, I said, evenly. If I'd reacted the way she expected me to, I'd be in cuffs. Instead, I've got patience and proof. That makes me dangerous in a way she can't understand. He gave me a long look, then slipped the flash drive into his pocket. I'll talk to her, he muttered. Good, I said. Because the next time she steps onto my land, I won't be this accommodating. That should have been the end. But Karen didn't believe in lines or consequences. That weekend, I woke to find my livestock pen wide open. The latch had been cleanly cut, the chain tossed into the dirt. My hens were gone, all 12. My goats were roaming the brush, confused and agitated. I followed the trail of boot prints through the back pasture, right up to the edge of the road, where the HOA's new boundary sign stood like a flag planted in conquered territory. A red ribbon had been tied to the post. That wasn't just vandalism. That was a message. I called animal control and logged the incident. Filed a report with the sheriff. But I already knew how this game was being played. Slow erosion. Psychological warfare. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. And that's when I stopped playing defense. That night, I activated the decoys. I pulled out 2 old army mannequins I used for range calibration, life-size, thermally active, realistic as real could be at 50 yards. I dressed one in camo, the other in a hunter's vest, and positioned them near the tree line facing the HOA development. Then I mounted a floodlight and timed it to a motion sensor. One wrong move from anyone crossing the fence line, and boom, full illumination on 2 armed men watching the woods. It didn't take long. Around midnight, I heard tires screech, then shouts, then the distant wail of a car alarm. Someone had panicked and hit the horn trying to reverse. By morning, rumors were flying across the neighborhood. Some said a militia had moved in. Others claimed I was running a private security firm for my barn. Karen, of course, doubled down, posted a community safety alert about potential threats posed by extremist elements occupying nearby land. Extremist.
Right.
I was sipping coffee on my porch when I saw the unmarked sedan pull into her driveway. State investigator. Not local. Not friendly. Turns out, someone had filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Veteran Services about harassment targeting a disabled combat veteran. That someone may or may not have included over 60 pages of timestamped documentation, property maps, and drone footage, all tied neatly with Karen's name on it. Her husband stormed out onto the lawn when the investigator left. I couldn't hear the shouting, but the body language said it all. Wild gestures. Finger jabs. And finally, a car door slamming as he drove away alone. Karen didn't come out for 2 days. When she finally did, her front yard was stripped of all the HOA-enforced signs. The little flags lining the curb were gone. The clipboard she carried religiously, replaced with a trembling hand and a tight, defeated frown. But I knew better. Cornered animals don't quit. They just get reckless. The final straw came at 3:12 a.m. I woke to the piercing whine of Scout barking like he'd just scented a threat. I was up and moving before my feet hit the ground. Outside, the night was moonless, but the perimeter cameras glowed like lighthouses in a storm. One glance at the monitor told me everything.
She was back. Karen.
Not at the front gate. Not on the road.
No.
She was in the back pasture, crouched low in a hoodie, bolt cutters in hand, sawing through my fence like she was slicing a birthday cake. She didn't know I was watching. She didn't know about the heat sensors, the silent alert system, or the small drone already hovering silently 20 feet above her. She also didn't know I'd moved the new trail cams to capture both daylight and infrared angles from 3 different vantage points. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. I slipped into my boots, grabbed the radio, and walked into the dark. From the ridge, I had full visibility. I kept my distance, eyes locked through the scope of my old custom Remington 700. Chamber empty, safety on. I had no intention of firing, but I knew exactly how to make a point. She clipped the last wire and started crawling under the fence line. That's when I triggered the spotlight. A blinding white beam erupted from the ridge post, lighting her up like a convict in a prison yard. She screamed, staggered back, and that's when my voice came through the loudspeaker I'd mounted the night before. "Don't move." She froze. "You're trespassing on private property. Law enforcement has been notified. Every move you make from this moment is being recorded." She panicked. Bolted. Big mistake. I watched her trip over her own feet and slam shoulder first into the water trough. The bolt cutters flew from her hand and clattered onto the gravel. She tried to scramble up, but by the time she did, red and blue lights were cresting the hill. The sheriff's cruiser cut across the pasture like a blade. Hart and another deputy stepped out with flashlights raised. I stayed where I was. Just an observer. Just a witness. Karen didn't go quietly. She shouted about harassment, claimed I had set her up. But they had the footage. They had the timestamps. They had the bolt cutters and the broken fence. This time, no clipboard could save her. They cuffed her on the spot. When Hart came to speak with me afterward, he just shook his head. "You baited her," he said, not accusing, just marveling. "No," I replied. "I anticipated her." He paused, then nodded slowly. "It's over now." "No," I said. "Now it's just documented." By the following week, Karen had been removed from the HOA board. Her house went up for sale 3 days later, quietly, without fanfare. Rumor had it the HOA was forced to pay a settlement to avoid a lawsuit tied to ADA violations, veteran harassment, and illegal surveillance. As for me, I filed for an easement that would legally redraw the boundary between my ranch and the HOA development. Just a few yards, but enough to install a line of native mesquite trees tall and thorned enough to discourage future curiosity. The HOA had no grounds to protest. They'd already lost their loudest voice. In the weeks that followed, I noticed something strange. People waved again. The young couple down the road brought over fresh eggs as a peace offering. A single mom from the cul-de-sac asked if I could teach her son how to safely handle a rifle. Turns out he wanted to be a ranger one day. Even Hart stopped by once just to check in. He brought me a bottle of bourbon and never mentioned Karen again. It wasn't peace, but it was quiet. And quiet is earned. Out on the porch, Scout lay at my feet, ears twitching every so often, but his growl long gone. The wind rustled through the trees I'd planted, and the stars overhead blinked like distant eyes watching in silent approval. I sipped my coffee and stared toward the ridge. Somewhere out there was the line I'd drawn, not just in dirt, but in principle. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But as a reminder, you can poke a bear and think it'll grumble. Or you can poke a sniper and find out just how precise retaliation can be.